I will never forget the evening my daughter stopped answering to her own name. We live 3 doors from the convent. You can hear their bell on calm mornings, and you see the sisters in the crosswalk helping school children pass. It never looked like the kind of place that could pull a child away from her mother inch by inch. It looked safe. It looked ordinary. Maybe that's why I let my guard down. My name is Maria. My husband works late most days, and I walk our 2 kids to school. Emily is 8. Jack is 4. Emily is the kind of child people talk about kindly at the market. Polite, soft voice, always drawing something with too much concentration for her age. She loved the sisters from the first hello. They noticed her. They remembered her name. They invited her to sit with them when I stopped by to leave pantry donations. It felt harmless. Good, even. At first, she came home with little prayers memorized. I smiled and taped them to the fridge. Then she started bringing drawings. Not flowers or houses. Crosses with long shadows. A woman in a habit with a mouth that looked like a straight line of ink. Graves with names scratched out. When I asked what the names were, she said, "They're quiet names." I laughed in the way mothers laugh to keep a room steady. I told myself she was just copying what she saw. The chapel, the uniforms, the old walls. I told myself children pass through phases, and that a phase is only a season. I told myself a lot of things that helped me sleep. One afternoon she told me, casually as a weather report, that Sister Isabel asked her to close her eyes and repeat a few lines. What lines? I asked. Lines for remembering, she said. She couldn't explain them. She said she liked how they made her head feel light. She said her hands tingled when she said them right. I said it sounded like any prayer, and I put pasta on the stove and stirred until the water rolled. I started to notice the small absences. The way she stood a little too still by the window. The way her shoulders didn't drop when she laughed. The way her bedtime voice smoothed into something careful, like she was reading a sentence inside her head before she let it out. I told myself kids grow in curves, and we don't always see the shape until later. Then the drawings changed. The crosses were taller. The faces were less like faces and more like ovals with empty space where eyes should be. She drew a woman standing behind a little girl. The woman's hands rested on the girl's shoulders. The girl was smiling, but the smile didn't sit right. The caption in her careful letters said, "When I stand still, I belong." I asked her what belonging meant. She said, "Sister says belonging is better than being lost." When I asked lost where, she said, "In the head." That night, I checked her room after she fell asleep. A rosary lay under her pillow. Beads scattered. The crucifix bent as if pressed hard against the table's edge. I knew the one she kept from church. This wasn't it. I put it in my pocket and stared at the window glass until my breath left a cloud. The next day, I walked to the convent and planned to pick her up an hour later. She kissed my cheek and ran ahead. At the door, Sister Isabel greeted her with a calm smile and that low voice people use when they are sure of being obeyed. Isabel remembered me from the food pantry. She always did. She had something about her that other parents liked. Something tidy. Something that made you nod. I lingered longer than usual that afternoon. I told myself I was early by accident. I told myself a lot of soft lies that are easy to carry. From the gate, I saw Emily and Isabel in the garden, kneeling side by side. Isabel spoke. Emily repeated. When they finished, Isabel touched Emily's hair, then her forehead, then both hands. Emily didn't look back at me when I called. I told myself she didn't hear. At home that evening, Emily sat at the table and drew in silence while I chopped onions. I tried to get her to talk. What did you learn? I asked. We learned how to be still, she said. Still how? I asked. Still like the hall before the bell, she said. I don't know why that unsettled me, but it did. Stills before bells are heavy. They carry a kind of hush that feels chosen by someone else. I wanted to talk to my husband and didn't. He would say work was boiling over, and he'd listen on the weekend. He would say the sisters are kind women, and that people like us should be grateful for kindness. I would nod. He is not unkind. He is practical, and practical people sometimes walk past the soft alarms a mother hears. The next morning, I found a paper folded under Emily's mattress. The paper was lined and torn from a school notebook. The words were phonetically spelled, as children do. Keep your eyes shut. Say the line 3 times. When your head feels quiet, say yes. When I ask, say you're ready. It wasn't a prayer I knew. It wasn't any catechism. It reads like a script for something private. After school, I watched her walk to the convent alone. The noise of the city moved around her. A bus hissed at the curb. A man argued into his phone. 2 girls laughed too loudly. Normal life. Emily crossed the street. Sister Isabel stood in the doorway. Her smile was calm. Her eyes were steady. She guided Emily in with a hand that never quite touched her shoulder. I waited at the corner. 5 minutes. 10. I told myself I was silly. 15. I texted my husband and got back the little bubble. That means later. I walked to the gate and pressed the bell. No one answered. I pressed it again. Another sister, one I barely knew, opened the side door and said they were in prayer and would bring Emily out in a while. Her voice was even practiced. I went home and sat at the table without taking off my coat. That night, Emily woke at 2 and stood by my bed, without speaking until I opened my eyes. I had a dream, she said. About what? I asked. About a room beneath the room, she said. There were drawers with names. When you open them, the names are quiet. She spoke as if reciting a list of ingredients. She climbed into our bed and slept like a stone. I did not. I started writing everything down. Times, phrases, little changes. I wrote to make it real, to keep myself from dismissing it as a run of odd days. When you write something, it stands up. It takes its own weight. The following week, the drawings doubled. She hid some under her bed as if they were treasure or contraband. One showed a line of girls with their eyes closed, each with a small mark on the center of her forehead. Another showed a room with no windows and a cabinet with many shallow drawers. The drawers had labels. The labels were smudged. I asked her where she saw that room. She said, "Sometimes I see it when my eyes are closed." I took the bent rosary to the parish office and asked the receptionist if they recognized it. She shrugged and said rosaries come and go. I asked the priest after Mass if he knew Sister Isabel well. He said she was a disciplined woman who had helped many girls find focus and peace. He smiled like the smile was supposed to end the conversation. I told myself to trust the people everyone trusts. I tried. I failed. The day things shifted for good was a Tuesday. I remember because I burnt the toast that morning, and Emily didn't complain. She always complains about burnt edges. After school, she didn't come straight home. She went to the convent without asking. I followed from across the street. The sidewalk was wet from a short rain, and the air smelled like coins. She didn't look back. At the gate, I called her name. She stopped but didn't turn. Isabel appeared and placed her hand in the air near Emily's shoulder again. That almost touch that had begun to feel like a signature. She looked at me and nodded once, as if acknowledging a passerby. "We're working on stillness today," she said. "It helps with restless thoughts." I said, "I prefer Emily home now." She said, "5 minutes." I said, "Now." She smiled in a way that did not change her eyes and said, "Of course," then spoke under her breath to Emily. My daughter's face smoothed, then tightened like a string pulled on a puppet. She walked to me slowly, as if measuring each step. I wanted to leave it, to go home, and let time sand down the edge of my panic. But panic doesn't stand down when the person you love looks at you like a photograph of yourself. At dinner, she stirred her soup without eating. Jack made a tower from crackers and knocked it over and laughed, and she didn't laugh with him. When I took her hand to pray, her palm was cold. That night, she whispered in her sleep. Not words I knew, cadence without content. I leaned close and caught a sentence. "I will be still," she said. A pause. "I will be still." Another pause. "I will be still." 3 times. Then she exhaled and her fingers loosened. The next afternoon, I told her we would skip the convent for a few days. She said, "But sister's waiting." I said, "That's fine. She can wait." Emily's jaw set in a way I hadn't seen on her. She said I shouldn't disappoint her. I asked who decides that. She said, "I do when I want to be good." The word good hung in the kitchen like steam. I decided to go to the convent alone. I rang the bell and asked for Isabel. She received me in a small sitting room with a wooden crucifix on the wall and a plant that looked thirsty. Up close, her calm is a kind of still water. You don't see what is under it unless you stand there longer than politeness allows. I told her I was concerned about these repeated phrases and about Emily's drawings. Children express storms in pictures, she said. Better the page than the body. I asked about asking Emily to close her eyes and repeat lines. We practice attention, she said. Attention saves many children from drifting. Her words were correct. They were the kind you put on a brochure. They did not touch the thing I needed to touch. I asked if there was a room with many drawers. Her pause was small but present. We have archives, she said. Every house does. I asked to see them. They are for internal use, she said. You understand. I left with nothing useful except confirmation that I would get nothing useful if I asked nicely. The next week, I followed Emily at a distance again. I watched her slip through the gate and cross the courtyard. Isabel was waiting in the hall like she knew our clock. When they disappeared into the inner corridor, I found the side door another sister had used once when I was kept out. It was not locked. I stepped in and stood by the wall, listening for footsteps. I remember the smell of polish and old paper. The convent is not dramatic inside. It is clean and used and quiet. Their voices were ahead, then a door, then no voices. I walked a few paces at a time, stopping whenever the building made any sound at all. I reached a short set of stairs leading down. At the bottom, a small door with flaking paint. No handle on my side, only a keyhole. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. I waited. A minute. 2. I told myself I was acting like a person in a story who makes the wrong choice. I told myself to go home. Then I heard a child speak, my daughter's voice soft. I can be still. A woman's voice lower. Again. My throat closed. I backed away before my courage turned into pounding on the door. That night, I told my husband everything in one long breathless run. He rubbed his face and said we should talk to the parish. We had talked to the parish. He said we should schedule a meeting. We had asked for one. He said he would come with me next time. Work was lighter on Fridays. He was trying. I was angry at the shape of help that arrives late. I started a plan. If I could not reach them in their house, I would gather proof that made refusal look like guilt. I photographed the drawings. I photographed the bent rosary. I wrote down the phrases Emily said in her sleep. I asked other mothers gently if their daughters came home differently. Some smiled and said the sisters help with discipline. One woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. She said her niece stopped laughing last year and then said she was happy about it because quiet is better than chaos. She used the word better like it had been taught to her. Emily began answering questions with phrases that sounded borrowed. I am fine. I know what I'm doing. You don't need to worry. None of those sentences were 8-year-old sentences. When she made a mistake, she did not pout or cry. She stared at the table as if waiting for a correction that came from inside her head. When I hugged her, she allowed it like it was part of a schedule. When I asked if she wanted to see her cousin on Saturday, she said, if it fits. The night before everything broke, I woke to the click of our front door. I sat up so fast my back hurt. Emily was not in her bed. Her duvet was folded back as if someone had shown care for fabric. I ran down the hall and saw the door cracked open. Outside, the street was empty except for the glow of the corner lamp. She was half a block away, walking toward the convent in bare feet. I called her name too loudly. She didn't turn. I caught up and grabbed her hand. Her skin was cool, as if she had been standing in front of a fan. I couldn't sleep, she said. Sister's awake too. I told her that is not our decision to share. She looked at me and did not smile. It will be. I locked our door and placed a chair against it like in a cheap movie, because sometimes cheap ideas are right. I lay awake until the light pushed a line under the curtains. In the morning, I called my husband and said we have to make a choice. We move, or we remove the convent from her life entirely. Today, he said we cannot move. He said we can talk to someone higher. He said many things. I said I would pick her up from school and not let her return there. I waited outside the school at dismissal, and Emily did not come out. Her teacher said she was marked present and left early with a visitor from the convent. I ran the 3 blocks with a stitch in my side. At the gate, I pressed the bell and pressed it again until another sister opened and said I should lower my voice. I said I will lower my voice when I see my child. She held my eyes a fraction too long, then moved aside. The hall felt narrow, despite its width. My footsteps sounded like someone else's. At the end, a door that had not existed in my memory yesterday was open. Inside, a room with a table and 2 chairs. On the table, a stack of index cards and a wooden box with many shallow drawers. Each drawer had a small label holder without a label. Sister Isabel stood by the box, one hand resting on it lightly, like a pianist between songs. Emily sat in a chair with her eyes closed. Her hands were on her knees. She looked like a statue of a child pretending to be calm. Open your eyes, I said. She did not. Emily, nothing. Open your eyes, I said again, and my voice shook with all the hours I'd held inside me. Isabel spoke my name without turning. Maria, she said, you're interrupting a lesson. I asked what lesson my child needed to keep her eyes shut. The kind that stops a mind from running in circles, she said. The kind that gives a girl an anchor. I stepped between them and touched Emily's shoulder. We're going home, I said. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, the old child was there, like a light passing under a cloud. Then it was gone. I can finish, she said, flat as a slate. No, I said, now. Isabel's hand lifted a little from the box, then lowered. Her voice stayed even. She is good at this, she said. Not every child could be so steady. I said steadiness without choice is another name for something else. I took Emily's hand and led her down the hall. No one blocked us. No one shouted. Quiet is a sharper thing than noise. Outside, the street gave me the usual noise, and for a heartbeat it felt like help. At home, I locked the door and called my husband and told him we were leaving. He said we cannot decide that fast. I said I already had. That night, I packed a suitcase for each of us and stood in the doorway of Emily's room and tried to name what was missing from it. The toys were there. The books. The silly glitter lamp. The missing thing was shaped like air. It was the way she used to leave her socks in the wrong place and laugh about it. It was the way she used to hum without noticing. It was a small, careless life of a child. I did not sleep. At 4 a.m, I heard her whisper again. She stood by the window. "When I stand still, I belong," she said very softly to the glass. "When I stand still, I belong." I said her name once, then again. She turned slowly and looked at me as if deciding whether to speak to a stranger. "We're going," I said. "Today." She blinked. She nodded once. The nod did not mean what nods used to mean. By noon, I had booked flights for the next day. We would stay with my cousin first, then find a place, then figure out schools, jobs, all the unglamorous things that make a life carry weight. My husband stood in the kitchen with his hands on the counter and said he was coming. He said he was sorry he had been slow. He said many true things too late. I hugged him and said we would be faster now. I kept Emily with me every minute until we left. No visits. No errands. When she asked for the convent, I said no. She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She only watched the door in that calm, cold way that had become a habit. We left the next morning with 2 suitcases and a backpack of drawings I could not throw away. At the airport, she held my hand because I placed it in hers. On the plane, she looked out the window and did not react when the ground fell away. Jack slept with his mouth open. My husband stared at nothing in particular. I counted seconds on the in-flight map so that I could shorten distance. In the new country, we found a small apartment with a view of a courtyard that always smelled faintly of bread. We found a school with a counselor who did not dismiss anything I said. We found a parish where the priest listened and did not reach for easy answers. We found a routine quickly because the routine is a rope. For a while, the drawing stopped. Emily ate more. She ran sometimes. She laughed once. A short animal sounded like a fox barking, and I cried in the bathroom because a small, silly laugh should not make a mother cry. I told myself we had cut the cord from the old place. I told myself we had stepped out of the shadow. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of Emily speaking softly to window. I did not move. I did not interrupt. I listened. "When I stand still, I belong," she whispered. "When I stand still, I belong." She paused. "I am ready." The words chilled me because they were 4 words I had never taught her to hold. The next morning, she drew a room with shallow drawers again. The labels were blank. She shaded them so dark the paper almost tore. I took her hand and asked her to look at me. "Do you want to go back?" I asked. "No," she said. "Do you want to see her?" "No," she said, and her voice did not waver. "Do you hear her?" I asked. Her eyes moved to the side, just a fraction. "Sometimes," she said, "when my head gets quiet." I started filling our days with noise. Parks, music on while we cooked, walks on streets with buses and shouting vendors and bicycle bells. It helped a little. I wrote to the parish back home and to the diocese and to anyone with a title that sounded like responsibility. I wrote clearly. I wrote dates. I wrote the phrases. I included photographs of the drawings. I expected a call, and when one came, it was to tell me that the sisters had always helped the neighborhood and that accusations can harm good work. I hung up and held the phone too tight and wanted to smash it and didn't. In the new school, a teacher asked Emily to draw her family. She drew 4 figures, 3 with faces, 1 with a blank oval where the face should be. The blank one had a small mark in the center of the forehead. The teacher asked who the blank one was. Emily said, "Me when I'm good." The teacher called me in and showed me and spoke gently. I thanked her and cried in the car. Time passed in a way that felt heavy and thin at once. I learned the price of bread and the bus routes and where to buy second-hand coats. Jack learned the name of a stray cat and shouted it from the balcony. My husband learned to cook 2 decent meals. We made a life. The old life stayed at the edge of the room, like furniture you decided to keep out of guilt. One afternoon, months after we left, Emily brought me a folded paper without being asked. "I don't want this," she said. Inside was a single sentence in her careful hand. It says, "When I stand still, I belong." Under it, crossed out hard enough to dent the table, the words, "I don't want to belong that way." I hugged her and felt her hesitate, then let go into the hug like a person stepping into warm water. I held her longer than was normal and did not apologize. That night, she slept without speaking. The next night she did too. On the third night, I woke to the sense that someone was standing near. It was only the shape a room makes when you are listening too hard. I lay awake and told myself we are allowed to heal, and we are allowed to be afraid at the same time. Sometimes people ask how we knew we had to leave. I say I knew the night my daughter stood at the window and spoke to a place where no one stood. I say you never need permission to remove your child from anything that asks for their inner quiet more than it offers them love. I say distance is not always an escape, but it is sometimes the first tool that works. If you listen this far, you know I'm not telling you a story about ghosts. I am telling you a story about attention and control, and the slow way a child can be trained to replace their own voice with someone else's. Call it whatever you want. I call it the day my child learned to answer to a quiet that wasn't hers, and the long work of teaching her to hear herself again. We have good days now. She runs more. She leaves socks in the wrong place again. She argues about bedtime like a small lawyer. Sometimes she still stands by the window and her mouth moves, and I put the kettle on and wait until it stops. Healing is a messy table. I said it anyway. I said it every day.